Well, something important to know when you're getting into the genre of law and the Old Testament, meaning if you're going to study any of the books of the Pentateuch or the Torah, it's important to know that actually it's not just all straightforward laws like you might have in the Ten Commandments, where it says, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, all the stuff. And it's never that straightforward, actually. That's only in the Ten Commandments and maybe a few other places do you have that. But actually, most of the Torah is actually narrative. And then even when individual laws are brought up, it's brought up in a scenario. And so, for instance, this difficult passage that we've been talking a little bit about already in Exodus 21 is a scenario. It's a common scenario of slavery, and that's what the people are facing in that time. These are the issues that come up, and then this is how you navigate those issues. Well, the issue that you have in Exodus 21, 1 through 11 is slavery, and it's, at least when we look at it, there seems to be an issue with how women are treated in that culture. And actually the law mostly has to do with slavery. It's a justice issue that has to do with slavery. And there's a male and a female case that's taken up in the scenario. And so it is important to us to look at, okay, the slavery issue as well as the woman issue, and kind of looking at slavery in the ancient world and how women fit into their culture and their time in the ancient world. Both of those things are going to help us to understand this passage. The scenario that we're dealing with is a male who gets sold into slavery and a female who gets sold into slavery. The backstory is probably a family that goes into debt, or a family that loses everything because they don't have crops for a couple of years and they don't have anything. They're poor, and so they can't afford to feed a daughter. So it would be an injustice for them in a way to try to keep the daughter if they were about to starve as a family. And so the best case, the scenario is that they're going to give this woman to, give one of the daughters to a patriarch. And so this is a sad sounding thing, and it really is. But this is a common scenario in the ancient world that they would be facing. And the other issue is that a male might go into debt to someone and then have to serve off that debt. And so when we look at it that way, it's actually kind of what we're looking at is an economical issue in the ancient world. And of course, there are then multiple laws and rights that the women have and that the male slave has within this scenario. And that's what the law of Moses provides, is it provides protection and it provides rights for those who are falling into those hard times. And at the very least, they're only allowed to be slaves for so many years and then they have to be released. And that's the very least, as I've talked about before with this passage. What the passage actually is trying to establish is justice, and so the answer is not let them go free, because they would still be in debt, but the actual justice will be when actually they're cared for, when they're actually given a place, when they're not just given food and a place to stay, but they're given a family, a future, an inheritance, a membership in the family. And so that's a more important value, at least in the ancient world and in this scenario, than being set free. Being set free is very nearly an injustice, unless if you have an abusive master. Being set free is, in that case, it is probably justice, the best thing for whether that's the male slave or the female slave. So yeah, a lot of people say that the Bible is sexist. And this is a tricky issue. Again, the Bible is an ancient book. It's ancient. It's very old. It's 2,000 years old if you're looking at the New Testament, at least. And then as much as 4,500 years old if you go back to Moses, or maybe even older if you're looking at the book of Job, and you're seeing that there's women in all of these books, and so we're getting a little window into what life was like for women in the ancient world. And I think that's the issue. actually what is happening is you're getting a window with the scriptures into the ancient world, just the same as you would if you read any other ancient literature. You would get a window into how women were viewed in a particular culture. What it might expose is injustice as well that's being done towards women. But it's not injustice to say that women in the ancient world found their value in having children. That wasn't an injustice. That actually, in many ways, that's an important thing to gather about the ancient world, because that's the issue that women were concerned about in the ancient world, was having children, and not just having children, but because they've had children, they're a part of a family. They have an inheritance that they're passing on, and they have a heritage. They're part of a great family, and they're not, barren, and they're not on their own, and they're not left without any family to care for them, and left without anything to pass on. This would be a real tragedy for ancient women, especially when you consider the issue in light of our understanding of the way that the ancient people thought about their existence. The way that they thought about their existence was that if they had a function, if they worked properly as a person who, whether that's a male who could have children or a female who could have children, this was a big part of their understanding of their function, was to be able to produce children and have a family, and for many to produce an entire tribe, and to build farms and little cities around their villages. And so this was, if you're thinking about the ancient people, this was something of a real value to them. And so actually, when you know that and you look at the Bible, you see that the Bible is actually speaking to that issue. It's not speaking thousands of years ahead to our time, to the way that to things that we value, to the way that our world works. It's actually speaking to them and in their time. And that's why actually what we see in Genesis and in Exodus, the way that women are able to fight for a family, or to be given a family, or to be protected and guarded. So even under the law, to have that family, it's a pretty special thing. And the ancient reader would read these things and they would say, wow, actually God is a God who is for women. He loves women. He appreciates them, and he actually is trying to protect their place in the particular civilization that we're talking about. And that was, the ancient world, the Hebrew people, who are smack in the middle of the two great superpowers of the ancient Near Eastern world. That's the Mesopotamian people of Assyria and Babylon, or that go back to the time of Abraham, to the Akkadians and the Sumerians, and then as well the Egyptians, and a handful of other ancient Near Eastern people groups. This was an important issue that actually is not skipped over in the Bible, and the fact that it deals with women in the Bible is probably what confuses us so much, because it was so different. It was different than in the way it is now. Women find value in many other areas, and so it's very important to know that, I think, in order to read the Bible and to say, well, this is a God who cares about women and wants to protect them, and help everyone else to see their value, their worth, and to give them dignity and honor in a culture. And so that's really important. You see that amazingly in the story of Ruth, where she's one of her closest kin is supposed to have what we would call a redemptive work in her life, because she's become a widow. And so the story that plays out in Ruth is really the manifesting of the laws that are created back in Exodus and Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and then they're playing themselves out in the story of Ruth. And what you have in the story of Ruth is an amazing justice and an amazing restoration of someone's dignity and their place, their heritage, what they're going to be able to pass on. And Ruth has a really special place in the biblical narrative because of that. And women have a really respectable and important place in the story. And so I personally love to see students seeing this and focusing in and getting a special look at women in the Bible, and so that they can say, wow, yeah, this is a God who cares about women.